Welcome to the Cold Case Christianity broadcast, the only Christian case-making program hosted by a cold case homicide detective. J. Warner Wallace has been investigating cold case murders in Los Angeles County for over a decade. His work has been featured on Fox News, Court TV, and Dateline. For more information about Jim's work and the case for Christianity, please visit coldcasechristianity.com. Now, here's your host, J. Warner Wallace.
Welcome back to Cold Case Christianity. I'm J. Warner Wallace. We've been talking about the importance of training rather than just teaching, and it's important for us to train also as Christians because we want to develop a forensic faith, not a blind faith, not an unreasonable faith, but a faith that actually is built on evidence that we can demonstrate publicly, that we can actually show to others, that gives us the kind of confidence and resolve to develop the kind of character we need to actually express what we believe to others. Remember, the better prepared you are to answer the tough questions about your faith, the calmer and more confident you'll be in response to objections. So you're not going to sound like the Christian Chihuahua, you're going to sound more like the Christian Great Dane. And number two, you're going to be more willing to engage others because you already know all the objections that could be offered and you already know how to handle those. This is the important distinction between teaching and training, but there's one that's even more important that we're going to talk about this week. I've often said it's important for us, when it comes to young people and it comes to ourselves, to stop teaching. As Christians, we need to move away from teaching as a model. We need to move toward training as a model. And I've offered an acronym, the TRAIN acronym. The T is for testing. Apply a test early to see what you don't know. It'll motivate you to do something about it. The R is for requiring more and raising the bar so that you will actually commit to taking the steps necessary to become the kind of case maker you should be. The A is for arming yourself with truth and also looking at what the other side has to say so you can better respond to what the other side has said. And the next step is the I in train. And this is about involving yourself and involving the young people in your life, the young Christians you know, in the battlefield of ideas. This is the one thing that turns teaching into training most quickly, most profoundly. And I want to encourage all of you to at least adopt this single principle. How can I put it to you? When you are a police officer, a first responder, you are going to find yourself responding in the field and having to basically get in the game and do things. You can't respond to every call from the dispatch room over the phone. If you could, you would never train to equip yourself with anything. You'd never train physically. You'd never train tactically. Why would you? You can handle everything over the phone. But of course, you can't handle everything over the phone. You're going to have to get involved at some point, get your feet wet, your hands dirty, and actually get out there and do something. And it's in preparation and knowing that you have to go do something that you start to really intensely pay attention. If we do this all the time, I think I've said it before here, we every training session we have, if it's driver's ed, or if it's defensive tactics, or if it's interview techniques, or whatever it is, we will have a portion in which we are on the chalkboard going through the S's and O's, X's and O's rather, the turn radius on turns, how you accelerate out of turns, you decelerate into turns. All those are great things to illustrate on a chalkboard. But at some point, we put you in the pursuit course behind the wheel of a car driving at 100 miles an hour. That's what we're going to have to do. And that is where you end up learning how to drive well. It's when you're wrestling that you discover how to grapple. It's when you're doing handcuffing techniques that you find out if you actually have muscle memory in terms of putting handcuffs on. These are things you have to be engaged in and involve yourself in. It's on the mat. It's on the driving course. It's in the street. This is where all that teaching turns into training. If you're preparing for that event in which you're going to be involved, oh boy, that changes everything. So this week we're going to talk about the I in the training model. That is involving yourself in the battlefield of ideas. Okay, now that being said, this is important for us to just see, how would we do that on a daily basis as Christians? It was a little easier for me as a youth pastor to do it than it might be, you're thinking, for you to do it. Because I have control of my calendar and I could actually make this kind of a thing happen. And I'm planning for a group. Most youth pastors are involving themselves in some type of annual activity. It's a camp. It's it's a VBS you're going to go and serve at. It's some a missions trip you might take. These are things that are usually on the calendar of youth groups anyway. So it's not hard for me to put something on the calendar that'll be a real challenge that'll require folks to study. But how would we do this for ourselves if we're not leading a youth group or we're not in a youth group? That's what I want to talk about on today's episode, because this is so important. How you're going to turn teaching into training is through the eye, involving yourself in the battlefield of ideas. Here's another way of looking at it. I remember when I wanted to do a better job, when I first discovered that my high school seniors were leaving Christianity the year they got out of my youth pastorate, I thought, okay, we got to fix this. We got to do something. Whatever we're doing, it's not working. And probably wherever you are, your kids are, that it's not working there either. We're going to do something. We got to do better. I always thought, well, I just need to do what I'm doing better. If I went to seminary, I got a seminary degree in theology. I thought I need to do what I'm doing better. I need to be better equipped. Well, it turns out none of that really was what made us better. It wasn't that I could, get out my papers and put them on the table and study harder and learn more theology, learn how to make the case. No, you don't change, as it turns out, your own life as a Christian or wherever you're serving. You don't change it as quickly by studying harder as you do by pulling out another paper that changes it almost overnight. And that paper is called a calendar. You simply have to pull out a calendar and say, on this date, we're going to go and do this challenge. And that changed everything. And I bumped into it by accident. I was serving as a youth pastor, and I had an intern that I had hired, a college-age intern, and she was a friend of Brett Kunkel at Stand to Reason. Now, Brett had really not started working at Stand to Reason yet, but he agreed to serve with us on his first ever summer camp. He taught apologetics at our camp because we wanted to equip our kids. And then he knew I had a family that were raised Mormon, my half-brothers and sisters, and he asked if I would be interested in going on a Mormon missions trip. And I really wasn't thinking clearly yet about how this might benefit us. I was really more interested for my own personal reasons, having had a Mormon family. But then I realized, well, wait a minute. What we want our students to embrace is a richer theological understanding of Christianity. You realize that if you poll young Christians, the younger we are as Christians, not so much how long we've been a Christian, but just our chronological age, the younger you are, the more likely you are to hold a heretical position as a Christian. Did you know that? So if you're 70-year-olds are far less likely to hold to heresies as 20-year-olds. I knew that we needed to prevent them from bad ideas inside the church, so we needed to teach them some good theology. And I started doing this as a matter of teaching series, which I'm sure sounded to my students like wah, 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 wah. It was teaching. Boring theology. I tried my best to make it engaging. Then we calendared a 8-day trip to Salt Lake City. And that changed everything. When we come back after the break, I want to show you how events that are on the calendar turn teaching into training. If you asked me, Jim, are you a Californian? I would say, yes, I am a Californian because I was born here, raised here. Look at my driver's license. It says California on it. Well, Jim, okay, what year was California founded? I don't know. How many counties are in California? I don't know. What's like the linear mileage of coastline in California? I don't know. What's the major crop that comes out of California? I don't know. What's the state legislature like? How do you pass a bill in California? I don't know. What's the population of California? If you really start to probe those kinds of questions, you're going to discover I'm a pretty crummy Californian. I don't know much about California, but you'd have to admit I am a Californian. Are you a Christian the way that I'm a Californian? Do you were kind of born and raised here?
You've been one your whole life? But don't ask me too many questions, too many detailed questions, especially if you started to doubt whether Christianity was true. Like, I'm not sure I can answer those. Well, it may be that you are in the right place, but you're there by accident. You don't even know why it's the right place. You may have been raised as a Christian. You happen to hold and believe something that is actually true, but you don't know why it's true. And if that's the case, you're going to have a hard time passing the why on to your own kids. So when they get challenged by a culture that's growingly and increasingly hostile to the Christian worldview, they might know what you taught them, but they don't know why it's true. I want to have a different kind of an impact on the culture in which I live. I want to be able to offer the reasons for why I think this is true, why our voice should still be heard. That's the difference between holding a blind faith and a forensic faith.
So here's the idea. The idea is that we have something we want to achieve. We wanted our kids to understand theology better, and we had a number of ideas how we might achieve this, but the thing that really worked was putting on the calendar something that would cause them to have to learn more about their theological understanding of Christianity. Let me give it to you by way of an illustration. Take a look at this illustration from Forensic Faith. Now, in this illustration, you can see that we're talking about intense training that occurs. And what we started with were some ideas, but what we wanted to teach. And we had those written out. We wanted to teach the case for truth, and we wanted to teach some theological positions. Great. But this is all going to probably never even really happen with the kind of impact that it could have if we simply put a battle on the calendar. And so that's what we did. We put a battle going forward on the calendar about 8 to 10 weeks ahead of us. That challenge was a trip to Salt Lake City, where we knew that our young people were going to be engaged and be talking to Mormons who are really smart, very active in their faith. For the most part, in Salt Lake City, the Mormons that we encountered on the streets at Salt Lake City, near the temple in Salt Lake City, on the temple grounds in Salt Lake City, in Provo, going door to door, next to BYU. These were folks who were committed to their Mormon worldview, and they understood it. And many of these folks in Provo especially had returned from their own mission for 2 years, trying to convince Christians that Mormonism was true. So my gosh, what a great group to talk to, right? You're going to be able to talk to people who have been trying to convince Christians that Mormonism is true, and you've got the opportunity to convince them that Christianity is true. And these are sweet people. Every conversation we've had has been really gracious in both directions, well, for the most part, in both directions. And we want to maintain that. So it's a great opportunity to exercise that 1 Peter 3:15 model, where we can give the reason for the hope we have in Christ, but we do it with gentleness and respect. And we're able to do that on the streets. But my gosh, if you told anybody, even you, if I told you, hey, I'm going to ask you to come with me, and you're going to want to come. And as a matter of fact, I've already cleared the calendar for you. You're coming. And when we get there, we're going to be doing street evangelism. I'm talking about maybe 5 or 6 different kinds of street evangelism. Door to door, on the street, friendship event. We're going to do all of it. We're going to do all kinds of evangelism. I think it would put some fear in your mind. You would say, oh boy, okay, I got to get ready for that. I doubt many of us would say, okay, I'm ready to go right now. I'm ready, I'm trained, I'm ready to go. Most of us would say, you know what, I need to get ready. Well, so did my kids. So did my young people in my youth pastorate. And how we did it, we started with a test. We brought in a Mormon bishop, or we had somebody who came out of Mormonism who would role play as a bishop, somebody who would really push them, and in an hour-and-a-half session show them how ill-equipped they were to defend the basic doctrinal truths of Christianity, the triune nature of God, the nature of heaven or hell. Is there a spirit prison? Is Jesus a man? Was Jesus a man who became God? Was he God from the beginning? All of these basic tenets of Christianity are challenged by Mormonism. Great. Bring it on, because that's going to help our young people to actually understand what they believe. They're going to have to study Christianity and Mormonism. But they're going to have to study their own Christianity to be able to express it. And by the way, it was spectacular to watch in action. We would have our young Christians go with us, and in every scenario we would put them in Salt Lake City over those 8 days, they found themselves deeply challenged, they would come home at the end of the day. We would stay at a local church. And you should have seen their prayer life at the end of the day. The nature and texture of worship in the morning before we would start, at night when we would come home. These folks were pleading with God to help them do better. And they would study. Oh my gosh. I've told this story so many times. I've had several students that I would watch them come home and stay up till 2 o'clock in the morning pouring through their Bible, trying to find the defense for this, or how do I answer that? And I'm thinking, wow, if their parents could see what's happening right here, they'd be blown away. We started to take video and create movies of our trips just so I could show parents, because I know if I told them that their son was up till 2 o'clock in the morning studying theology, they're going to go, yeah, right. But no, he was, and that was every night. And I didn't have the heart to tell him each day that tomorrow you're just going to find a new objection that you haven't studied for, because I wanted him to study. And boy, these kids really responded. Well, what's happening here is that they are now involved. They are now engaged. And I saw transformation in terms of their theological understanding. A lot of those kids ended up making careers in the mission field because they could not detach themselves from the first love that they developed on those trips. Take a break. When we come back, I want to talk to you about the other kind of trip we took and why this is where I think we can start to kind of produce something for ourselves as older folks that's similar, that could actually help us to calendar something that would turn teaching into training.
I can remember when my kids were young, growing up, that we made choices as a family. My wife and I made choices that really were in the best interest of our kids. We were raising kids. For example, if we wanted to go out to eat dinner, we would pick the spot that was really better for them than was for us. If we didn't really want to eat there, but that's good for our kids, so we go there. What movies should we go out and see? Well, I didn't see the movies I wanted to see. I ended up seeing the movies my kids wanted to see. What kinds of vacations should we take? Well, we're going to take kid-friendly vacations, right? Because we're raising young people and we want to do what's in the best interest of young people. Well, we have a great opportunity as a church, because it turns out as a church family, we are raising young people. They're around us all the time. And we have a choice. Do we want to have church be the way that's good for me at my age? Well, no, I'm raising kids in the church. I want to shape my faith in a way that blesses them, make decisions about vacations that bless them, make decisions about my music choice, how I study, all these things. I make decisions with my kids in mind. And now I'm making those decisions with the kids in my church in mind, because I have an opportunity to give them something more than a blind faith, to give them something more than a faith that will crumble once it's questioned. I want to give them a skill set as detectives that they can then use to thrive, that I can use to thrive. You take great risk when you have great confidence. The less confidence you have, the less risk you're willing to take. We have an opportunity as a church family, if we want to hold to a form of blind faith that always kind of wonders, or if we want to develop a forensic faith that's driven on a skill set that will make you certain and will help our kids meet the challenges of the next generation. This is about answering an opportunity to live differently, to not have a blind faith, but to have a forensic faith.
Now, I want to offer another approach we took also. I mean, this is, again, we had to calendar things in order to involve our students in the battlefield of ideas so that they would spend the 8 weeks typically spent teaching. They would see this as training for an event, training for the challenge. Again, the calendar changes everything. And I started off with really kind of working on the theological ideas with my students, because we were seeing it and this is always happening every year. There's somebody writing a book that challenges an orthodox doctrine related to sexuality, related to heaven, related to hell, related to how people are saved. There's always a challenge that's coming from people who are calling themselves Christians within the church. So I wanted our students to be so well equipped as theologians that they could see these bad ideas coming and know why they were bad ideas. Okay, that was important. But I also knew that they were far more likely in university to encounter people who weren't even Christians who would challenge them rather than people who would call themselves Christians with bad ideas. They were going to get these secular bad ideas from the culture. And I knew that the trip we were spending to study theology in Utah was not going to equip them for that. So that's when we started to come up with other ideas. And Brett and I, Brett Kunkel at Stand to Reason, we started to think about another trip that would be more philosophical in nature and would deal with the arguments of the new atheists. And so we started taking trips to Berkeley. UC Berkeley here in our state of California is one of the most liberal schools and is certainly one of the most hostile schools toward a Christian worldview. It's a great place to go if you want to encounter people with an entirely naturalistic, secular worldview and see what they have to say. And also you see a lot of apathy. Forget about people who are against Christians there. There are some of those, but far more are simply apathetic and hold a very inclusive, pluralistic, relativistic worldview that is kind of picking and choosing from a smorgasbord of spiritual ideas. That's what we were seeing on that campus. Now, by the way, regardless of where you are in the country watching this, your state has a school like that. If you're in Wisconsin, it's Madison. If you're in Colorado, it's Boulder. I mean, there's tons of places that would be a challenge if you were to send your Christian student to those campuses. And they would have to know and be inoculated with both the bad ideas of culture and the good, true ideas that respond to those bad ideas before they could really go and survive in that environment. If you ask me, you don't send them unequipped, unarmed. We're going to send them armed. We talked about that in the last show. So this show is really about, well, the actual battlefield, the involvement, the engagement. That trip to Berkeley was spectacular. Although I can tell you that you don't see a lot of apathy on the streets of Salt Lake City and Provo. You got people who are really engaged in their Mormon worldview, but you do see an incredible amount of apathy in Berkeley. You got young people who are just basically chasing their passions and desires and haven't necessarily thought. So what we would do in Berkeley is we would use surveys. Surveys are a great way to kind of figure out where there's some diagnostic questions. And I've actually included one of these surveys in the book, Forensic Faith. It's in the appendix there so you can see it, so you can kind of maybe use it yourself. Because I think this gives us a model that we could use in our own training. Now look, you're not necessarily going to have a youth group you can take to Berkeley. I get it. And I want you to be trained. If you're my age, I want you to be trained. So, okay, so how are we going to do that? If we're not going to use a missions trip, if we're not going to do it by way of some large event like this, is there some other way we could do it? Yeah, I think there is. I think you know it too. It's going to involve a calendar though. So the question then becomes, what can we do on our calendar? We can start very simply. Very simply. Let me give you one that's this kind of seems obvious, but maybe you haven't done anything with it. Do you have someone in your family that you've said, you know, someday, if the time is right, I'm going to share Christianity, I'm going to share Christ with that person? Your mother-in-law, your uncle, your nephew, somebody who you're just waiting. You kind of think, I've been modeling Christ for this guy or gal for years, but I haven't really ever said anything about what it is to be saved or what Jesus did on the cross. You haven't shared the gospel, the good news with them. Oh, really? Do you think that time's just going to happen? Oh, trust me, you could wait. You'll have probably a better chance of being regretful about missing an opportunity than anything else, because if you don't make the opportunity, there won't be one. Get your calendar out. Set a date. I mean, be ridiculously rigid and ritualistic and be OCD about this. Get your calendar out and set a date and say, okay, I know I'm going to see them, or I could go see him on this date, and this is when we are going to do this. Because I think what happens is if you knew that next Friday you were going to bump into somebody that really needed the gospel, and you had a chance to do it, and you were going to be, they're going to even ask you. If you knew somehow through the, your ability to foretell the future that someone's going to ask you a question next Friday, if you knew that in advance, you'd study. You'd be ready for that question on Friday. Well, now you do know that on Friday you're going to have that conversation because you just put it on your calendar. Put it on your calendar. Hey, I know people who will put on their calendar, and they started doing it every Friday night. We have a large outdoor shopping mall here, And every Friday night, they would take themselves and two of their kids, and their kids' friends would start to join them, and they would go street evangelize in the outdoor open market. If you know that's coming, you will get ready. If you said, I'm not ready to do that, it's so awkward, I don't like doing that. Well, if I told you you had to do it and it was going to happen 2 weeks from Thursday, trust me, over the next 2 weeks, you'd get ready. Set a date for yourself. Raise the bar. Arm yourself. Don't go get involved. Go get engaged. This is also true for simple things. You're probably going to a church, a local church. Have you ever volunteered to teach a Sunday school class? One of the best ways to be a good learner is to be a teacher. If you know you have to teach it every Sunday, guess what? You start studying. I know, as a pastor, I knew I had to deliver messages to these young people on Sunday morning. That means that I started studying usually by no later than Tuesday afternoon. I'm studying. Even though I'm working full-time, I'm thinking about it. I'm listening to things on the way back and forth to work. I'm getting ready to spend hours writing this material. Why? Because I know I got a date on Sunday. Put a calendar on it. You start teaching. Lead small groups. Start a small group in your home. You don't think you can do this? You got time for other things. You can do this. It's simple things. If it's just the simplest thing, calendaring when you're going to approach your loved one, or calendaring when you're going to teach others. If you've got young people, you don't have to go to Berkeley for a week in order to accomplish this task. That's why I put the surveys in the back of the book. Pull the survey out. Next Saturday, go down to the local college. On a Friday afternoon or a Thursday afternoon, great times to go. When people are Monday afternoon, people are almost always there on Mondays, right? Go out there, and in the afternoon between 4 and 7 o'clock, you will encounter young people on that local college campus. And if you just spent 3 hours, if you put that on the calendar for next month, and you know you're going to get a lot of questions, because the survey produces a lot of questions on their part. You're not just there to check boxes and fill in the answer. We don't care what their answers are that way. We care what their answers are so we can engage them in conversation. They're conversation starters. We care about their soul, not about their answers on a sheet of paper. So you take that sheet of paper with you, and if you know you're going to do that next Thursday, you're going to be ready. You're going to get ready you know what kinds of answers, what kinds of questions these are going to raise. You got to be ready to answer in those areas, or just jump out and start doing it, and you'll find out what you don't know, and then you'll get ready for the next time. Here's my point. Be creative. All it takes is a calendar and your willingness to do something. Go do something. Get involved. That is the thing that turns teaching into training. Okay, we'll see you right back here next week when we'll talk about the last piece of this training model, the need to nurture.
Thanks for joining us at the Cold Case Christianity broadcast. If you're interested in more information about this week's topic, please visit coldcasechristianity.com. For a thorough investigation of the reliability of the New Testament Gospels in the case for Christianity, be sure to purchase Cold Case Christianity. A homicide detective investigates the claims of the Gospels. It's available wherever books are sold.